Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. My name is Ken Shorgen, and as always, I'm here with Paul. And Paul, we've got a very fascinating thing going on in Germany. It looks like they have decided to go full bore and try to rebuild everything. Paul, as always, I want to thank you for being part of the discussion and start us off with the proposal for a debt break.
Well, first off, Ken, great you've joined. Likewise, as always, it's a real pleasure. Well, I would be far more blunt about this. Germany's committing economic financial suicide. I mean, literally, because what Germany did more than a decade ago was to introduce what's termed this debt break. And what that did, it would allow new borrowing only to be 0.35% of annual GDP. There is a proviso to this that said, look, it can be suspended for emergencies that, in inverted commas, are out of the control of the German nation. Now, one example of this, it was suspended for 3 years when the pandemic started in 2020. Why? Because it would allow huge amounts of money or borrowing to finance a whole bunch of things, the whole rigmarole that went on in every West country, where everyone was just throwing money around like it was confetti, stimulus, etc., etc. Now, the anticipation is you're going to have Merz as the CDU-CSU chancellor, and they're going to form a coalition, likely with the Social Democrats, which, of course, the leader is the outgoing chancellor, Scholz, and they will seek to loosen the debt break, which, obviously relates to running up huge amounts of debt. Why do they want to do this? And they're not trying to do anything to benefit the real economy. Oh, no, that's irrelevant. It's to spend obscene amounts of money on defense spending. They also want to, they said, set up a huge 500 billion euros, why not make it a trillion, fund to finance spending on Germany's infrastructure in the next decade, whatever that means. Because again, this is like, let's copy the Chinese, except the Chinese know what they're doing and Western countries don't. And obviously, the sort of flip side to this as well is they've decided in their infinite wisdom to loosen debt rules for particular states in Germany. So the argument is Merz, who's going to probably have this coalition government with Scholz, they'd propose exempting spending of more than 1% of GDP on defense. Obviously, now that's a significant increase. And the justification, of course, is the nasty, evil Russians, because we've got this increased threat. Apparently, it's taken them 3 years of the Ukraine war to suddenly work out there is this threat. And apparently, it's clear to everyone in Europe, I mean, that we, Germany, must now act very quickly and make these huge efforts to strengthen the defense capability of not just Germany, by the way, the European continent. Now, there's a double-edged sword to this, because does this relate to Trump saying to NATO countries spend more, or is this Europe trying to flex its own muscles and do its own thing? Because the reality is, Merz has also made comments about being independent of the United States and having European defense, and not exactly saying they don't want to be an ally of the United States, because they do, but almost trying to sort of half flex their muscles a bit. And apparently, of course, this defense capability is because, on the one side, Russia's losing the war with Ukraine. But in the next breath, we're so frightened of this country who's losing this war that they may then go invade all our countries and take us over in Soviet Union 2.0. We made the point before, but make your mind up, stop being hypocritical and contradictory in those two statements. So Merz also makes the point, look, we're counting on the United States, who as part of our mutual alliance commitments, but we also accept the fact that the funding of the defense of our country, has to expand significantly. Why? I mean, let's not mince our words here. Germany is in dire straits. Its economy is cratering. Its financial system is cratering. There's an argument, and we're not getting into specifics, like all the rest of the banks in the Western world are creaking to varying degrees, and there's no money set aside, to reinvest, to try and get new tech jobs, to try and stimulate growth. Dare I say it, fix Nord Stream and get cheap Russian gas. Now, it's an interesting point, just as a slight side note, that Europe was supposed to be basically ending all gas supplies or all energy supplies from Russia, even though they're getting all this LNG through the back door, which is quite ridiculous given it costs so much more. It's probably basically the same gas they should have been buying through the pipeline, but a lot more expensive. But they're suspending or postponing, maybe indefinitely, this idea we're going to phase out Russian energy, because they've finally woken up privately to the fact we can't do this. Instead of course, it would be better for Merz to go and say to the German people and to everyone in the West, we know who's responsible for blowing up Nord Stream, and actually using that as leverage. But of course, it's again the Chihuahua yapping behind the Rottweiler's leg. So obviously, as ever, German politician comes out and goes, well, this is terrible. We've had this ongoing problem for 3 years, but we can't make any more delays. We have to make decisions, and we have to make them quickly. We have to railroad all this policy decisions through. But you know why they're trying to, in part, railroad this through? Is because they want to bring legislation on the exemption for defense spending in this ludicrous 500 billion euro infrastructure package that will never see the light of day. I mean, look, if they spend 10 billion, which will have to be financed by loans. I mean, who's going to be the creditor for 500 billion euros? The Chinese? No. Who else? The United States? Forget it. So who's it going to be? The European Central Bank. So it's just going to be QE, because no one else is going to finance it. But they have to get it through Germany's outgoing parliament, because there's a risk the next time around, because the makeup of the parliament is going to be different, that someone like the AfD could block this and say we're not, because they don't want the war to carry on. They don't want Germany to be hemorrhaging huge amounts of money to start or reignite the issue of we can't afford to pay for this war anymore, and we can't, therefore, on that basis, if we can't pay for the war because we're bankrupt, we can't certainly start paying huge amounts more money as part of a commitment to our military capability to defend ourselves from an enemy who, if we ever went to war with them, it'd be all over in 10 minutes, or even less in Germany, via nuclear war. So all this military spending is meaningless. But, it's incredible how people believe this nonsense, but they do. And I think that, for me, is a good point to stop, Ken, and then we'll just get your thoughts, and then I can come back to some other discussion points.
There's a fascinating thing that they've come out with. The reality that Germany has spent more, and the EU as a whole, has spent more on buying Russian energy than they have the money and arms that they put into Ukraine. Think about that for a second. Their so-called enemy is Russia, and yet they've given more money to them than to Ukraine to fight in this conflict. One of the fascinating things that Germany is Germany really has declined in a manufacturing and industrial sense immensely. Volkswagen is not doing very good. A lot of their older models have sold out to the Stellantis and the GMs and the Fords of the world. So you have this talk about wanting to do military spending. Well, take a look at the arms that Germany provided to Ukraine. Antiquated, outdated, they don't have a defense industry. So they're going to be borrowing money to then go into debt with another country, maybe the US, maybe whomever, to buy arms for them to build this great army. Meanwhile, they've got no industry that they're building. This infrastructure, I'm not sure what it is because they stopped doing nuclear. They're limited to buying LNG from someone else. They don't really have coal manufacturing much anymore. The whole thing is just, sophistry on top of BS, in my opinion. But that's what politicians tend to do when they have no real plan and no real mission or goal of what they want to accomplish. It's throw a ton of things against the window and see if it sticks, and maybe we can deceive the people for another 3-4 years to the next election, etc. We saw this, occurring in the United States, and why our infrastructure, our manufacturing, our industrial base has gone absolutely into the toilet. What Germany should be doing is they should be cultivating capital into the country from China, from whomever, especially a lot of the Asian Pacific region. But instead, no, we're going to go more into debt. Well, how much more in debt can you go? The ECB has been printing money and running ZERP, even negative rates, ever since the great financial collapse, or at least the 2010 European collapse. And they have no idea what they're going to do with that money. It's almost like, hey, we need to borrow it because that's the only thing we know how to do.
Yeah, but also the problem is they don't have zero interest rate policy now. They've got quite relatively high interest rates. And what Germany's going to borrow off the back of that? I mean, the interest payments were going to cripple them. But again, it's just not, let's spend money to invest in the country, to invest in jobs, in new technology, in education, in healthcare, whatever, to build the nation. It's all just superficial and words, and throw huge figures at it. It's also interesting, Merz came out and said, I'm going to provide immediate 3 billion aid package for Ukraine. It's been held up in the German parliament for weeks, but now he's going to approve it as some off-budget expenditure. Again, the more money gets sucked into this black hole. Meanwhile, 3 billion could do with being spent in Germany, but when there's problems domestically, there's no money available. When it's in relation to Ukraine or the arms industry or defense, in inverted commas, there's always a bottomless pit of money. And things get even worse when you put it in the context. In the last 3 years and at the start of the Ukraine war, Scholz, who was obviously the chancellor, said that he would increase Germany's defense spending to this, don't know why, 2% of GDP matters. But he also, at the time, and this has largely got forgotten, the creation of a €100 billion fund to modernize the military. Now, it's worth noting, there was a statement that came out where basically Germany's admitting they've got nothing left militarily to give to anyone. They've just emptied the coffers completely of everything. It's all gone to Ukraine, and it's all been blown up and destroyed. All these game changers. Apparently, the German tanks were going to be game changers. Well, that, of course, never materialized, like all the other game changers. I mean, the only risk is I don't think they dare do this to Germans, because Scholz said, no, you're not having the Taurus missiles, but those so-called long-range missiles have gone completely off the radar and off the table. No one talks about it. They don't get used. And thank goodness for that. But the thing with that 100 billion fund, I mean, with which Germany was supposed to meet this 2% target, do you know what? The money will be all gone in 2 years. I mean, so what the hell was it spent on? I mean, and we don't know. And consequently, but now we have to spend even more money because we have to actually replenish all the stock that we gave to Ukraine that was destroyed. What with? More rubbish or someone else's rubbish, because remember, all the West game changers were nonsense. So, but we have to defend our country because the Russians are coming and they're going to plow through the Baltic republics into Poland, then into Germany, and they'll take us all over, even though they spent 3 years telling us they couldn't fight a war. and they were going to lose the war. And remember, the Russians were taking chips out of washing machines to repair military equipment, etc., etc., etc. You can see the nonsense of this. Then, I mean, and I'll let you come back in, Cam, because then I want to get on to the nuts and bolts of what this is going to do in terms of borrowing, what the perspective is, what markets are already signaling to us, and I'll come back then with that point.
Yeah, the one thing I would put in this is there is a very great potential that this is all just rhetoric and nonsense, because yes, the CDU and the SPD may be coming together to get this through, but they still need the support of a few other coalitions. The Greens, who is it, the radical left, anything to do with military and defense, they're not going to get on board. The Green Party, well, they're going to demand that a large portion of this goes to their green and welfare programs, not defense. So, how much support are they going to get in Parliament to be able to pass this, especially if there's not going to be any true something tangible that the German people can see that it's actually doing something to improve not only their lives but the economy as a whole.
Yeah, but what I would say, Ken, I know this with German people, if you talk about defense and the threat of Russia, most people will go, fine, just spend the money because that's more important. It's a very different mindset, and I know that from personal experience. So, that we have to factor that in. Also, remember, Baerbock's a Green, and look at her track record as a foreign minister, and we're not going to discuss that specifically, but it's a bit of a strange makeup. The one thing that may potentially create problems is the AFD, because they've got 20% of the vote now. But I don't know constitutionally quite how it works to vote this through. Is it just a majority, in which case maybe the coalition governments will railroad it through anyway? But the point is, it's about time people in Western nations realized what's more important. We've been deindustrialized because of appalling sanctions policy that blew up in our face. No one's questioning in Germany publicly, well, apart from the AFD, who actually blew up Nord Stream, which is an act of obscene terrorism. But apparently we all know it's not Russia, so who is it? It must be an ally. I mean, that should cause outrageous consternation in the country. And weirdly enough, it doesn't. And I've had conversations on this very point with people about this, and there's almost an embarrassment to have to discuss it because everybody knows in reality who is responsible. But then there's all this, who's going to finance this? And it's interesting if you look at the 10-year bond yield, which is obviously the 10-year German treasury, for want of a better word. Borrowing costs jumped on the announcement of this deal. Now, what it means in the long term remains to be seen. But, if bond vigilantes get hold of this, then they're going to want their piece of cake, and they want to eat it. But borrowing costs rose by the most in 28 years because the idea is, there's going to be this huge boost. Our economy is going to be revitalized because we're going to invest in the military and infrastructure. So we're just going to build lots of bridges and roads going to nowhere. But hey, it's like Keynesianism, again. I mean, just build stuff, and I mean, it's going to make no difference. So yeah, the 10-year did rise to over 2.7%. It was the biggest one-day move, I'd say, in 28 years. And of course, there's all these ideas. It's going to boost the economic growth of the country. It'll be, I don't know why it's going to be 2 or 3% higher next year, because they're not even going to start doing anything. But, it's always one of those feel-good things. Even the euro rose against the dollar. Well, frankly, who cares? But they definitely want to push these changes through the parliament before the new parliament takes place. Because, interestingly, and I just suddenly remembered something which ties in with what you were saying and is correct, yeah. The AFD part, and I think the left parties had this blocking minority in the February 23rd election, and that could prevent constitutional change in the next legislative period, which might mean this puts a complete kibosh on them being able to pass this. They're going to be desperately trying to put this through as fast as possible on the sidelines. But, German economy is cratering. Why? Higher energy costs. There's no corporate investment. Consumer demand's fallen off a cliff edge, and you can sit there and go, well, Germany's debt to GDP is low. Yes, it is. But so what? The economy's falling apart. And the idea is, some spurious reason, and we'll justify it to the public to spend 500 billion euros. Ask the question, if you've got 500 billion euros, spend it on the country and regenerate the economy, get investment back into the country, start to fix Nord Stream, get the cheap energy back, ask for Chinese investment, and because all the German businesses are screaming for things to be done correctly. They have been for 2 or more years, arguably the whole of the war. Listen to them instead of these idiotic ideas that will do nothing. And like everything in the West, they all sound great. And then in principle, nothing happens. Everything comes in massively over budget. And the grand sum of improvement in the German economy is nothing.
Yeah, the one thing that stands out to me, going back to what you were saying about, the German people will be all for it. Take a look. If you go back and take a look at the voting bloc that votes for AfD, they're the former East Germany that was under Soviet and East German rule. That what woke up to the fact that they see much of Europe falling under, that more socialist guise that they don't want to be a part of. And, you see this a lot with some of the people from Europe, from the Eastern European bloc who emigrated to the United States, is they grew up in that type of government, and they don't want to see it. And they suddenly see it happening into the countries that they move to. So it's fascinating how Germany really is in a transition period. And I hate to say it, no matter what Germany does, as long as they're under the dominion of the EU, the unelected bureaucrats dictating policies from Brussels, they're limited on what scope they can do. Brussels wants to continue the conflict, so they're all for building up the military. But when it comes to building up the economy, Brussels will come say, oh, that's unfair to the rest of Europe, and you can't do this. And it's almost like having a regulatory system on Germany where they can't do anything. We already know France is in the toilet, going back to Hollande, where they put so much restrictions on. And then what does Europe do as a whole? Anytime there's a successful company, whether it's Google, Facebook, X, whomever, is better than their own similar companies, they just bring indictments, lawsuits, or sue the hell out of them because they can't compete. This is the part of the problem the United States is going through, is we no longer have a base of engineers or innovators to go ahead and take us out of the doldrums we've been in. China, of course, has, and India have the brain power. Europe has lost that as well. So you can pump as much money into this as possible, but I think you probably agree it's just painting on top of a rotten fence, and it's just going to try to get through for another 4 years till the next election, when things fall apart and they declare a new thing. Oh, we can borrow 500 billion more and do this and this and this. Well, we saw what happened in the United States when they did that after the pandemic, and nobody knows where the money went to.
And also it caused massive inflation because it was printed. But just a final point, this is just part of the fact that Europe doesn't realize all these politicians, the contract I will refer to, they signed up to is over. The world's changed. They just are living in a world that doesn't exist anymore. They think it still exists. To them, it's very real. So they'll just carry on making the same noises, the same comments, the same policies, because no one's tapped them on the shoulder and said, listen, it's over. They're not listening to the Americans who are telling them the old world is over, and they'll just keep merrily play. The orchestra will keep playing as the Titanic sinks. And that's, I think, my final point.
Yeah. We may do something on exactly that, the end of the 500-year colonial rule, but that's for another day. Paul, as always, thank you for your insight and for being a part of this discussion.
Yes, and likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you, as always, for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment. Send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.